panel on sustainable fashion. Firstly, thank you all for being here today. My name is Nisha and I'm in 11th grade at the International School of Zugin Luzern, and I will introduce our topic and honorable guests. Alongside me, we have Victoria, who will be conducting the interview. The purpose of this panel is to understand the importance of making more responsible consumption choices and to help us achieve this by providing alternatives to fast fashion within Switzerland. In order to discuss the importance of sustainable fashion or the fashion industry as a whole, we must start off with a brand that we all know, Zara. So the term fast fashion was first heard when Zara landed in New York at the beginning of the 90s. The New York Times described Zara's mission to take only 15 days for a garment to go from the design stage to being sold in stores. Fast fashion became common due to its cheap and fast manufacturing, and it's where most of us get our clothing from today. But now, the world consumes in excess of 100 billion pieces of clothing a year. In addition, due to the constant rotation, or rather demand for new trends and products in the fast fashion industry, 92 million tons of waste is dumped into landfills every year. But it's not all bad news because retailers today are recognizing the need for change. For example, Zara recently announced a series of sustainable initiatives, such as a goal for 100% of its materials to be sustainable by 2025. At ISADEL, we aim to motivate our students to make more sustainable consumption choices by prioritizing sustainable fashion as the future and our latest trend. For example, we have a YFS Clothes Swap initiative, as well as a sustainable service group. During the next 30 minutes, Victoria will be interviewing our 4 inspiring individuals. Firstly, co-founder of Retour, lecturer at London College of Fashion and ISADEL alumni, Nina van Valkenburg. Next, we have global brand communications lead at Adidas and has worked in the past with multiple brands, such as Uniqlo and Farfetch, Margot Camus. Next, we have co-founder and brand manager at Full Circle and ISADEL alumni, Konstantin Ball. And our 4th panelist is the founder and project manager of the sustainability project, The Climate Clock, and founder of Eco Fashion, Eleanor Poli. Thank you, panelists, for being with us today. Now, Victoria will share her screen and present the Menti, which is a website where you can send in questions for our panelists. So, Victoria, would you like to share your screen? All right, so please access the Menti via menti.com and using the link at the top, or using the code at the top, sorry. All right, so we would love to hear your questions and make this as interactive as possible, so please leave questions for our panelists. Now I would like to hand this over to Victoria, who will be interviewing our guests.
Thank you so much, Nisha. I'm Victoria, and I'm also a grade 11 student here at ISADEL. It's my great pleasure to welcome everyone to this YFS panel. So as we heard from Nisha's introduction, it's a real privilege to be able to spend some time with these incredible speakers today who have done so much to help educate on the impact of our fashion choices, as well as make sustainable fashion more accessible for us all. So to start us off today, there might be some of you in the audience who don't know much about the fashion industry or what the difference is between fast fashion and sustainable fashion. So for those members of the audience, what exactly makes fast fashion unsustainable or harmful to the environment?
So I'll go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you so much for having us. This is such a pleasure. And just in terms of context, I mean, the fashion industry is huge. I mean, 1 in 6 people on the planet are involved in the fashion supply chain. If you think about the agriculture that's involved, if you think about the manufacturing, the retail side. So the impact of fashion, has been, well, quite negative when we think about, harmful dyes going into water streams. If we think about, how a lot of garment workers, primarily women, are being exploited for their work. But it doesn't have to be just doom and gloom, because it impacts so many people. If we can actually implement circular systems, we can actually create a positive impact for those individuals and communities. But the real problem here is, as Nisha was saying, is 100 billion garments are produced every year, and we're not even 8 billion people on the planet. So it's the volume which is the issue, but also the lack of transparency and speed. So if you are a huge retailer and you have a turnaround of less than 15 days, those suppliers are under huge pressure, huge strains, and they're focused on meeting those deadlines and not actually supporting their garment workers. And that leads to, as we've unfortunately seen in 2013, the Rana Plaza collapse, which killed over 1,100 people. So there's a lot of factors involved, but in terms of the fast fashion, it's the speed of how garments are produced and those volumes.
Thank you so much, Nina, for your contribution. I think that really clarified it for us. So just to follow up on that, Nisha told us a little bit about the history of the fashion industry, and obviously fashion has changed a ton over the past few years, and the way we consume has also changed. So my next question is, at what point in history did fast fashion start being seen as a problem, and when did companies start shifting to become more sustainable?
So I might go in with this question. It's a really, really great one. I think it's important to realize that, less than 100 years ago, people, like how we consume fashion was very, very different. So maybe you would get 1, 2, maybe 3 pieces if you were really lucky per year. It would be in your local community, and usually you would go to an artisan who was skilled in that craft, and all the materials would come locally. So it was very rare, it was very exclusive to royalty and aristocrats to get silk from the other side of the world. That was just unheard of for the average person. So things were often passed down and reused and mended and really taken care of because clothes was so precious. And now, it's such a short amount of time as far as history goes, how we consume fashion has just totally changed. And I think it's that increase in the disposability and consumerism of I want everything now, everything on Amazon has to be delivered on the same day, and just our attitude towards things as a whole, and trends and fashion that would have been unheard of for the average person less than 100 years ago, because clothes was there to serve a purpose, to keep us warm, to keep us safe from the environment. But now really, which I think is a great thing, I think fashion can be something that ties back to your individualism and your personality, and it might be a really great creative way to express things that are important to you, and I think that's great. But I think how we've approached fashion to be so disposable, and a lot of people just don't question why a t-shirt costs €3, and they don't really think about that t-shirt, the cotton for that t-shirt has to be grown and watered, and then the supply chain for that to get to your local store is huge. So I think it's really important now, and I'm seeing that through schools, through universities, and young people are really questioning brands, and they're saying, why is this cost so low, and who is that cost really getting passed on to? So I think, a lot of different shifts have happened recently with the rise of fast fashion, but I also think on the other side, there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of critique to companies, and companies are also trying to be more transparent and kind of meet in the middle, because people are more interested in this topic than ever.
Thank you so much, Margot. So again, kind of following up on that, how has the production of clothing changed to become more sustainable and to solve this problem of fast fashion?
I can take that one. I think, to kind of give some more context about what does it mean when we say sustainable fashion. There's nothing, there's no such thing as 100% sustainable. I think it's also good to know that and to clarify that when we talk about this topic, because every time you produce something, there is a footprint. So it's really about being transparent and kind of showing, it's about, being transparent, showing how your supply chain is actually, sorry, I'm having trouble with my Zoom here. Nina, can you take this one actually?
No, sure. I was just going to jump in actually.
Yeah.
And I think what you guys are doing, with Full Circle is really quite inspiring because that touches upon transparency. And I don't know if you guys know the company Circular ID, and they're from the Eon Group, and they work with, RFID technologies. And the idea is that you can basically scan a piece of clothing and it gives a bit of a passport. So it says, where is that garment made? Who made it? What materials is it made from? And also, how can you recycle that garment once you've finished using it? Because that's one of the big barriers to sustainability, is that we want to be sustainable, but we don't actually know how to do it in an effective way. Eon Group, they're now working with H&M. They're working with the Net-a-Porter Group. They're working with PVH. So quite a few big brands, quite a few big conglomerates. And when that information is not only, given to the consumer, but also from a business point of view, it brings much more value. Because if you think about, I use this, let's say this shirt, I don't wear it anymore, and I'm just going to throw it away. No, I would never do that, of course. But if I were to do that, that value just goes off a cliff. That value is just wasted. And so, when we think about the shift towards sustainability, there's always going to be that argument of, okay, but, what's the business value there? And actually, it unlocks so many more opportunities, for innovation, for different ways of consuming. And going to your question there, companies are now engaging in new resale models. They're engaging in rental. Ralph Lauren, they now have their own rental program. H&M invested in a resale program. And so again, this is a good news story because, the industry is evolving, which does lead to new opportunities, for new people. And so technology plays a huge part here, but also thinking about the legalities. And there's a lot of conversation in this space. So for example, in New York last week, they'd like to create the New York Sustainability Act, which basically is a legal agreement that brands have to show transparency of their supply chain and also show their impact on certain criteria. So if that comes into fruition, that will really impact so many different cities, so many different countries in the way that we consume. So again, there is change in that area, but transparency is key here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nina. I think that's definitely right, that transparency is so important when we're talking about how clothes are produced. So, and also thank you so much for giving us some examples like Ralph Lauren and H&M that we also know, so we can kind of put it into some context. So Eleanor, now moving on to some more specific questions for our panelists based on their experience. Eleanor, you've done a lot of advocate work for climate change and sustainability as a whole. So how do you raise awareness on the impact of the fashion industry on climate change?
Thank you, Nina, Victoria, sorry, and thank you, Nina, for the talk before. That was really inspiring and interesting. The way you raise awareness about, for example, climate or the impact of fashion is, firstly, you need, for example, those webinars. So the panel that we're having today is obviously extremely important. Sometimes just 10 minutes or half an hour video can make a difference. So when I founded EcoFashion, my role was to really raise this awareness. One way to do it was webinars. The other way to do it was to understand what are the different protagonists. They're the people working in the fashion industries and the people that are using the clothes. So from a consumer point of view, what I did was webinars, but also to map out in Cambridge, because the project was founded in Cambridge, map out in Cambridge the shops that were having sustainable options using the app that exists, which is called Good On You, which rates shops and brands depending on how sustainable they are on the animal welfare, people welfare, energy use, water pollution, dyes, etc., etc. You can have a look at it later on. So it was mapping out so that people could already understand, okay, well, there's other options. Fashion has this impact, but also where can I then, you know, buy my clothes? And the other way also was, once you go in the shop and say, look, we're rating you and we're putting you on a map, which means that you might get more or less attractive depending on how sustainable you are. You basically tell them, look, we as consumers, we're putting pressure on you because we want sustainable options. And the other thing is, you can think maybe, especially in Cambridge, where it's a very student-like city, you have lots of people who work in there who are students. So they're in retail, but they don't know what they're actually saying. So you go there and you say, well, look, I have a question about 20 pages about how sustainable your brand is. Can you answer it? Do you get specific training? And by going in there, you already make them think. You make them think, what am I working for? What impact do I have? And can I teach my customers better? And then it also goes back to they, for example, HR or CEO at some point when you put enough pressure, and that's when you kind of close the loop from consumer end to producer end. So this is what we've been doing. And the last thing that we're also doing is we're trying to create some workshops where we teach people how to sew again, because this is a skill that's been lost at 20 last year. So in Switzerland, it's still mandatory in some schools to learn how to sew, but most people can't actually do it and don't do it, when actually it's a basic skill, and it really changes the way you think about your clothes. If as soon as you got a hold, you discard it, it's very different than if you just sit down for 5 minutes and you do not shoot it back. So you kind of empower people by doing this, and then you close the loop on the whole thing.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. So what you're saying is that we kind of need to involve everyone, not only consumers, but also producers and retailers to really have an impact. It's not just about one person, it's about everyone kind of getting together. So yeah, thank you so much. A follow-up question on that for you. So you've without question done so much to advocate on sustainable fashion, but I think we can all agree it's easier said than done. So would you say that accessibility is an issue that consumers face when choosing between sustainable and fast fashion? And if yes, what are maybe some ways that we can make it more accessible?
I think it depends a lot on the country, and it depends usually on your range, basically your age range. I remember when I was 14 till 18 or something like this, my parents weren't buying my clothes anymore, and I had very little pocket money. I had to find lots of jobs on the side if I wanted to buy my own stuff, and it's usually when you want your own style. So it's where you turn your attention to H&M and Zara, because these are accessible, and you can't go in a shop and say, I'm going to buy a 200 pound or franc boot, because you don't have that money accessible right now, and maybe your style is changing. And it's the same for example, families with low income. It's difficult for them to find those 200 francs available right now, because it's just they're trying to make ends meet. So in this, yes, there's a problem, but I think we are overdoing this problem, because there actually are lots of solutions. For one thing, don't buy clothes every year. So you put a cap on how many clothes you buy per year and try to make it maybe less important to you. And you make a budget the same way you would do for other stuff, and don't buy clothes to make you feel good, just like a dopamine extraction from buying something, getting out. So that's the first thing. Second thing, there's lots of secondhand shops, this charity shop, and in Switzerland it's not that common or really loved, but in the UK it is, and it's quite interesting to see the difference there, that you have lots of tailors, lots of places where even if you buy something, then they can tell you, well, we actually partnered up with a tailor that can do this for you. And I think this is where we can bridge things, is that until you get a salary that is good enough for you to buy clothes that will last for 10 years. I have stuff that I'm wearing since I was 14. And yeah, they're starting to have holes, but you just sit down and do this. You can bridge this gap by, trying to make clothes a bit more accessible, but still very high quality. So you have to find a compromise. And then once you have your salary, then you say, okay, well, I invest for 10 years. So this jacket is going to cost me like a lot, but at least I'm going to have it for a long time. And in the meantime, I have the skills to sew it back, or I have a tailor and I have a second shop. So kind of understand and make people understand what are the other solutions. You don't always have to buy new clothes at H&M. You can actually make a budget, sew your clothes and invest for later. We have to change the way we think. This is the most important thing. It's like, and it wasn't that long ago, like 100 years ago, you can just go to an H&M, right? You were using the same pair of shoes for a long time. Sometimes you had outgrown it. We don't need to get back to this, but we can get a bit into this small circle mindset reusing, because you just don't have a choice. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
I just want to chime in on this because I think you made some really good points, Eleanor, around I think the most sustainable way to shop is to not buy something new, go secondhand. I think it's amazing that the school is doing clothes swaps, because that's something as well that you can measure, the carbon emission savings instead of buying new clothes, what that generated. And I think it's a great way to connect communities and swap things and try new things. But on a personal level, I write a lot about being a minimalist and really having a small capsule wardrobe. And you don't have to go to my extreme of like, oh, my wardrobe is like black and white and like some neutrals in there, but that things like that ensure that everything matches. And I think sometimes people think, oh, that's so expensive, buying a really nice, tailored blazer. But something else important is to calculate the cost per wear. So if you are going to buy something that's a real investment piece that you're going to wear for years and years on end, then you really calculate like how much is that costing per times that you're wearing versus something cheaper that's lower quality that you will have to replace more frequently. So I'd really encourage you to save up for pieces that are like have longevity and aren't trend-based pieces, but are just like staples that you feel great in. And I always say, when you're trying something on and you don't love it, really think about it. Like, clothes should be investments and they should be long-term things. So I always say, okay, I'm trying this on, but I don't love it. So how much will I have to pay a tailor in order to make that fit perfectly? And so I feel wonderful in it. And I think once you start removing all the items that you like don't love, and you just have a wardrobe of really functional pieces that you love wearing and that really work for you and you feel great in, that's also a really like sustainable way to approach your wardrobe as a whole as well.
Thank you so much, Eleanor and Margot. I think for us as students who maybe don't have as big as a budget, these are some really helpful tips as well. So Constantine, I wanted to ask you, is everything working okay with your Zoom?
Yeah, it should be fine. I was just getting a lot of random pop-ups from the app.
All right, perfect. Then I guess we can move on to our next area of interest, which is a question for you. So Constantine, you co-founded the incredible clothing company Full Circle that is kind of based around the concept of a circular economy. So based on that, would you say that production waste is a big contributor to fast fashion? And if yes, can you tell us a bit more about that?
For sure. I think, as was previously mentioned, like 100 billion pieces of clothing every year is an excessive amount. And also the fact that fast fashion kind of relies on these super low prices to get people to come back. Like it's part of their, intrinsic model of how fast fashion is built. And yeah, like we wanted to basically change that and see how people or change how people value their clothes. And we started a model where we looked at, okay, how can we make a garment that is actually designed to be recycled? So it won't end up in the landfill. So our garments are made out of 50% recycled, post-consumer recycled cotton and 50% virgin organic cotton, so that the fiber strength is still good enough so that the garment can actually last a very long time. Because yes, you can make 100% recycled cotton garment, but if it only lasts, a fraction of how or the same amount of time that fast fashion items last, then there's not really that big of an improvement. So we created this garment, and then with it came up with the circular take back model, which actually allows customers to, when they're done wearing their garments, so if they deem the garment to not be wearable anymore, for example, if it has like a big red wine stain on the front of a white t-shirt, sometimes it's not fixable. So instead of them just tossing it out, they can actually return it for a discount on a new item that they choose. And then we made it as convenient as possible for people. So they get the new garment in the mail in a resealable envelope. They take out the new garment, put the old one in, then we get it back, we store it and we sort it, and then we eventually recycle into new garments, so that it's essentially a zero waste supply chain.
Thank you so much, Constantine. Yeah, I think it's really impactful what you're doing, kind of to touch on what Nina said before about the value of our clothes and that we shouldn't just throw them away if there's a stain on it. So I think that's really impactful what you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks.
So moving on to our next topic, Margot, I have a question for you. So based on your experience working with brands such as Adidas and Farfetch, what are some things bigger companies are doing to implement sustainability into fashion?
Yeah, so big brands are doing a range of things. And I think it's important to start off by saying that no brand, whether they're big or small, are perfect. So it's all very much a journey. And I think something to watch out for is, brands that say, oh, everything we do is sustainable, because I often actually don't love the sustainability word applied to something. I'd rather talk about how it's more sustainable or how it's using more innovative materials that leave a smaller footprint. So that's a good tip, is when companies kind of do these blanket statements, really dig in and find out what is more sustainable versus the counterpart or what they did previously, and ask questions and get educated. So some of the things that companies are doing is they're investing in sustainability innovation. So for example, creating products or ranges with recycled materials, whether it's by stopping any new or virgin polyester, which is essentially plastic, by incorporating other materials like Tencel, organic cotton, wool. At Adidas, we recently announced Milo, which is a mushroom leather. So really reducing the amount of virgin polyester is the goal. Another option is recycling that. So for example, we work with Parley for the oceans that do cleanups in ocean communities all around the world. And then we repurpose that plastic collected into yarns that go into our products. They're also really investing super heavily into carbon emission calculations and providing transparency around that. So for example, at Adidas, we recently partnered with Allbirds, who are an incredible startup. And it's really two competitors coming together to create something that we couldn't do separately. So we launched our Futurecraft Footprint shoe, which has a 2.94 kilograms of carbon emissions, when the average running shoe is around 13 to 15 kilograms. So that's something we couldn't have done separately. And I think coming together and collaboration is really the key to creating more sustainable products. Something else is like exploring new business models. For example, creating circular products. Like at Adidas, a good example is our Made to Be Remade line, which all of the products in both apparel and footwear in this range have a QR code. So once it reaches the end of its life, you scan the QR code and begin the returns process, and are also then getting a discount for a new product from the range. And because it's all made from the same material, it then goes back and gets grinded down and remade into new products within that collection. And that keeps on growing and growing. It started off with just a running shoe, and now it's like a whole collection that kind of launches capsules every season, which is super nice to see that impact actually growing.
Thank you so much, Margot. Really appreciate it. So what you're saying is kind of that, like, again, it's about transparency and knowing like if the product is sustainable or not. And I think that's really great that companies are trying to weigh more awareness on that. So thank you so much. We have time for one more question before we move into the audience questions. So Nina, I have one question for you. So on top of co-founding the brand WeTour, you teach at the London College of Fashion. And so what would you say we as students and teachers and other members of the audience can do like today to be more sustainable with our fashion choices?
Really good question, important question. I very much remember, being at ISL, going to Matali after school, looking at different clothes. And, what we can do every day is when you do choose a garment, ask yourself, will you wear it at least 30 times? If you don't, then don't buy it. Second of all, viewing those garments as assets and not consumables. So not something that you're just going to throw away, but something that is, intrinsically, it has value. So not just, the joy that it brings you, but maybe you'd want to resell it on Depop, next year. Maybe you're going to repair it or upcycle it and then rent it out. So you can actually yourself benefit from investing in these garments. Also, you guys as a generation have the power to redefine what is cool. I mean, 10 years ago, buying vintage was a little bit stuffy. It wasn't as desirable. Whereas now, I mean, that is, something that everybody wants to get involved in. They want to buy that kind of old Gianni Versace jacket from the, 90s for like 10 francs. And that's a really kind of beautiful shift. And I mean, as, Vivienne Westwood was saying, years before, it's about, buy less, choose well, make it last. And I mean, that's something that, I think we can all resonate with. And ultimately, the most sustainable garment is the one that we already have in our wardrobe. So making sure that that is being, lasting through the years. So those are kind of some top tips from my end.
Thank you so much, everyone, for everything you've contributed already. I think that it's been really insightful for all of us. So now we've gotten some audience questions throughout our panel that we're going to focus on in our last few minutes. So the first question we received is, what is the plan for fashion in the future concerning sustainability?
Well, I think fashion still has a long way to go. I mean, we see a lot of bigger brands now, pledging their zero emission goals and things like that. But there is still kind of a lack of funding. There's been articles that came out recently that calculated that lack of funding to be somewhere around $1 trillion, which is needed to make those big steps and achieve all those goals. But I think, if big brands are kind of in coalition with government, kind of make that headway and push for those innovations so that they become more accessible to also smaller brands like us, for example, then I think slowly but surely we will, get there.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Konstantin. And so we have some more audience questions. This one's quite long, but it's okay. So looking 5 years ahead, what do you see are the 3 priorities supply chain needs to focus on to drive sustainability and momentum change?
If I may, I don't know if the others want to take it. So I'm not directly in the industry, I'm more on the consumer point of view, but I think the biggest change you can do is really just changing the mindset, because as long as there's people buying clothes and buying in the fast fashion ways, companies don't have a real incentive to do it. And then, as Konstantin mentioned, they don't necessarily have the funding. So the really big thing you need to do to drive the change is this. Also, the last 2 years with COVID, we've seen an increase in brands going for sustainability. And they say, oh yeah, we're sustainable, but it's also what we call greenwashing, right? They're hiding, and we, again, don't have this transparency that's really key for us to then say, oh, actually, this is safe to buy, right? We need to see all the facts. And if you don't have people buying, then you have the right pressure that you need, and then you can, help and make this big change. So from my point of view, it would be this. Obviously, there's always the changing the machines and changing the material, so the raw material that you have, going for organic things, but also while keeping in mind biodiversity. So there's a lot of things to take into account, but the consumer one is actually the most powerful one. If everyone wants something sustainable or to buy less, then the fashion industry will have to follow.
And if I could just add as well, Eleanor, completely agree with what you're saying. And I think in 5 years' time as well, I mean, technology, continues to evolve. And what's really exciting is, the power of, digital garments. I mean, that's already being used from a sampling point of view. So, some brands still to this day, they design something in London, they then ship that prototype to Turkey, then they make adjustments and they ship it to Paris, and that's being shipped to London. And it takes a really long time. It's inefficient, lots of emissions being, done versus, actually designing, online or, in digital means, you can actually make those changes in real time. It's much more collaborative. And, a lot of brands are already, using this, but that's important. We talked about the importance of transparency and actually scanning garments, kind of linking them to circular economy, but also an example here from the kind of social side is it was called the Bangladesh Accord, and this was built from the Rana Plaza collapse, and it basically is a legally binding agreement which kind of brings these brands and trade unions from the garment workers together to make sure that there's good health and safety standards, and that's going to we need to grow that. We need to change or improve the criteria, make sure that we're meeting those requirements for everybody involved in the supply chain. So it's a technology point of view, but also that social side, which is really key.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. And I think it's also about being ethical when we produce and how clothing is produced. So Margot, I know you touched on being a minimalist, and so we got a question from the audience asking how many items of clothing you would recommend a person should have. And so I'd like to hear your perspective on this, if you don't mind.
I think it's so dependent on, where you live, whether, like, for example, when I moved to London a few years ago, I had this personal challenge to only move with 2 suitcases, a check-in and a carry-on. So I minimized my life humongously and I love fashion. So goes without saying, clothes was very much prioritized in there. And obviously since then I've collected more things, living in sunny Australia, I didn't even have like a coat. I think like a jumper was the thickest thing I owned. So I definitely think, if you love like outdoor sports and you do hobbies and activities, that piles up. But I would say like try and figure out where in your wardrobe you have excess and try and really find like multi-use items. For example, things that I can wear to work or to a, conference or presentation, more formal things, but then I can also take into my personal life. I think the blazer is something I mention a lot. I love a good blazer. I feel like they're very versatile. So things like that, I think where you can minimize and only have, for example, 1 coat instead of 3. Is really handy. I don't think there's a set number, but just constantly going through your wardrobe. And if you're not using anything, give it to a friend or put it on Depop. As Nina mentioned, there's always ways to reduce and like simplify and revamp your wardrobe.
Yeah, can I also chime in there quickly? I think it's, like you said, like normalizing wearing the same thing, again and again is also very important. Like originally or a couple of years ago, it's like, oh, I need to wear a different outfit, all the time. People can't see me wear the same thing. I mean, like Hollywood and red carpet, like all that, of course, plays into that. But I think if you really invest in pieces that you love and you are proud to wear all the time, because you're like, wow, I saved up to buy this jacket from, my favorite brand or designer, then yeah, I think you will feel different about it as well. So yeah, I think that's also very important.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. And this kind of links into our next audience question is, what are your opinions on reselling such as Depop? Because I think that's something a lot of teens are interested in.
Yeah, I think like I used to work in fashion more on the retail side. So then I turned in a bit of a fashion nerd. I was around people who, spend a lot of money or invested in garments quite a bit. So I ended up buying more like designer pieces and stuff like that. And they weren't always new because I was a student at the time. So it turned into this thing where I would buy something, I would wear it for a while. If I changed my style, I knew that, okay, well, this item is very good quality and it still holds value. So I could just put it on Grail. That was kind of like my platform that I was using at the time, and still get money for it. It might be a bit less, but depending on the item, it could also be more. Whether it's like Rick Owens or something like that. And yeah, it also made me look at fashion differently. and now of course with Depop and Vinted, it's become way more accessible for sure.
I think another tip there, like I'm a huge Depop fan. I haven't seen it so much in Europe, but in Australia it's quite big. It's to actually rent pieces. So for example, if you have a ball or something very formal where you don't really need to buy a dress for it that you might not wear again, renting pieces for a few days, and you send it back, they dry clean it for you. It's much more affordable. And also you can play around with different designers that maybe you couldn't afford to buy at full price. And then a range of people get to benefit from that is also another amazing model that I'm seeing more and more in Europe.
Yeah, one example here in London, it's a great rental company called Buy Rotation. It's peer-to-peer, and it fosters a sense of community, of course. But last week, or 2 days ago, actually, they just announced that they're also adding resell to their rental offering. So I can rent this shirt, but I can also sell it on to someone else. And just to go back to your question, I mean, the CEO of Vestiaire Collective said something that really struck a chord with me, because if you're his name is Max Bittner, he was saying, if you're a Zara customer, you can go on a resale site and buy something from Cézanne. If you're a Cézanne customer, you can buy something from Isabelle Marant. And then you can kind of go up the food chain in that sense. So it does make it much more accessible. And maybe you spend a little bit more than you usually would, but you're buying that better quality. So I think resale really does open up, the accessibility, conversation, which is so important to sustainability in general.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for your input. I think we have time for one or two last audience questions. So we have a question more about politics. So do you think politics and lawmaking have a part to play in regulating some of the excesses mentioned that are existing within the fast fashion industry, such as taxation of resources used or minimum wages?
I think it's absolutely essential, because if companies aren't regulated, and they're all they care about is kind of like shareholder profits or profit in general, constant growth, then there isn't really like a limit on what they will do to keep driving the price down. Of course, there's customer demand and stuff like that, but we also can't forget that oftentimes we are in this like sustainability bubble, and us as people, our values are very much tied to sustainable fashion and environmentalism, things like that. But 98% of people still don't think like that, unfortunately. So unless they're it's from the bottom up, but also from top down, that companies feel this pressure to become better in their production practices and the materials that they use. And I don't think that change is going to happen as fast. And I guess climate change is not like we can just drag our feet. Like, we need to pick up the pace to meet those goals that everyone's pledging now.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Constantine, again, that like everyone plays a role in that. For this to work and have an impact, really everyone needs to participate. So I think we can actually do one last question to finish it off. So do you think that the situation can improve this year in 2022 and in the future?
Yes, yes, it will. Again, I prefer to be more on the optimistic side. I mean, of course, we have to be realistic because it's such a huge problem. But just from what I see with students that I work with, whether those are business students or designers, everybody really wants to place environmental and social justice kind of in their practice. I mean, here in London, I work with Central St. Martin's students, LCF students, and literally every designer that I speak to, is focusing on sustainability. So there is a complete shift as to what is how they want to contribute to the industry. It's not just about, oh, I want to be the head of Louis Vuitton menswear. That used to be the case, let's say 10 years ago, but now it's actually making that impact. And I think it's not just in fashion. I think all of us, want to have that career where we're actually leaving something, of value and something, that inspires others. And so I'm extremely hopeful. There's momentum. We have the technologies. Margot, I think you mentioned, Milo and mushroom leather, Myco Works, they just got $100 million in funding. So that'll really kind of bring, new materials, more mainstream. So yeah, at least from my perspective, I think this will be an exciting year.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we're all really excited to see what the future has to hold in terms of sustainable fashion. So now I'll hand it to Nisha for our outro.
All right, thank you so much to our guests for sharing their experience, knowledge, and ideas. So before we finish this off, we wanted to give you something that you could take home. So this is a database full of local, global clothing brands, charities, and educational pieces, so articles, documentaries about sustainable fashion. And you can access all of this by scanning the QR code on menti.com. All right, thank you everyone for joining, and have a lovely day.